Most people think rudeness is a flaw, something that destroys reputations, burns bridges, and exposes immaturity. But that's only half true. The other half, the one no one teaches you, is that rudeness, when used consciously, can become one of the most powerful social weapons you'll ever possess. Because what we call rudeness is often just honesty that refuses to kneel. It's the moment you stop packaging your words to protect someone else's ego. Machiavelli would tell you that most people aren't ready for that kind of power. Not because it's evil, but because they don't have the discipline to use it strategically. They use rudeness as a reaction, not as a weapon. The first thing you have to understand is this. There's a vast difference between emotional rudeness and strategic rudeness. Emotional rudeness comes from insecurity. It's when someone lashes out because they feel small, ignored, or powerless. That kind of rudeness exposes weakness. It shows you can be provoked. Strategic rudeness, on the other hand, is cold, intentional, and rare. It's when silence could serve you, but you choose a sharp word instead. Not out of impulse, but to establish order, to make the other person recalibrate their perception of you. It's the kind of rudeness that makes others step back and think, wait, I can't play with this person the way I thought I could. Machiavelli understood that power isn't about being loved. It's about being respected. And sometimes fear and respect come from the same place. People confuse niceness with morality, but niceness is often just submission dressed politely. He'd say that excessive politeness is an invisible leash. Others use it to control you. The polite person always folds first because they've been trained to keep the peace at any cost. And the one who can tolerate being seen as rude gains a terrifying freedom. The freedom to say no without apology, to confront lies without softening the truth, to hold boundaries without guilt. Think about how often people manipulate you through manners. They interrupt you, insult you subtly, cross lines, but do it politely. You hesitate to react because you don't want to seem rude. That hesitation is the leash tightening around your neck. Machiavelli would smirk and say, politeness is how the weak keep the strong quiet. The moment you care too much about appearing nice, you hand your enemies your silence. You make them comfortable while they undermine you. But here's where the nuance lies. Real power doesn't come from being rude constantly. It comes from being capable of it, but rarely needing to use it. The threat of rudeness itself becomes the weapon. Imagine someone who is calm, composed, rarely raises their voice, but when they do, the whole room freezes. That's Machiavellian, because they've built a reputation of control. So when they break that calm, even slightly, it sends a shockwave. The key is contrast. Politeness sets the stage and rudeness delivers the impact. Strategic rudeness is communication without decoration. It cuts away the excess. You don't insult, you don't yell, you simply refuse to perform. You answer directly when others expect diplomacy. You don't sugarcoat, and you don't offer smiles to people trying to deceive you. It feels rude to them only because they're used to manipulation disguised as kindness. When you speak the truth without cushioning it, you become unpredictable, and unpredictability is a form of power. People begin to self-censor around you. They become cautious, measured, respectful, because they know you don't play by the same rules. There's a Machiavellian brilliance in that. The world is built around soft rules of social behavior that favor those who conform. But when you violate those rules with precision, you create confusion, and confusion creates opportunity. He once wrote that a ruler should be both a lion and a fox. The lion instills fear through strength. The fox manipulates through cunning. Strategic rudeness combines both, its strength expressed through cunning. You might appear irrational in the moment, but in reality, you're shaping perception deliberately. Look at it this way. When you are too polite, you give others the illusion that they are safe to overstep. When you are occasionally rude, you remind them that your boundaries are not negotiable. Think of a boss who's overly friendly with their employees. They laugh, share stories, try to be one of them. It feels good at first, but soon discipline erodes. Deadlines slip, respect fades. Eventually the boss snaps and suddenly they're seen as the villain. Why? Because they never control perception from the start. A single calculated moment of rudeness early on, a refusal to laugh at a disrespectful joke, a cold look that ends unnecessary familiarity, would have established dominance without a word. There's a strange paradox about being rude. It only works as power when it's selective. If you're rude to everyone, you're just exhausting. But when you're kind most of the time, measured, articulate, and suddenly you cut through someone's nonsense with an unfiltered sentence, that moment lands like thunder. People remember it. They don't call it rudeness then, they call it authority. Because authority isn't about volume, it's about finality. The Machiavellian master doesn't argue. They end conversations. Another mistake people make is confusing rudeness with rebellion. They think being loud or offensive is power. It's not. True rudeness isn't rebellion. It's command. It's the quiet refusal to flatter, to bend, to explain yourself. It's the ability to say no and let the silence do the damage. It's when someone tries to test your patience and instead of reacting emotionally, you simply look at them and say, "You're wasting my time." That's it. That one sentence, if delivered with calm certainty, has more power than 100 polite excuses. Machiavelli would call that the elegance of dominance. Minimal words, maximum effect. Because power isn't shown in how much you say, it's shown in what you can withhold. And rudeness, when it's real, isn't about saying more. It's about refusing to say what others expect. You deny them the performance they rely on. People are addicted to emotional predictability. They expect apologies, small talk, flattery, compliance. When you don't offer any of that, they feel disoriented, even offended. But beneath that discomfort, something else happens. They start respecting you. They don't admit it, but they do. Because deep down, everyone recognizes strength when they see it, even if it unsettles them. That's why Machiavelli would tell you, don't aim to be liked, aim to be understood. And if rudeness is the price for clarity, pay it gladly. The people who matter will respect you for it. The rest were never allies anyway. In fact, you can test loyalty through mild rudeness. Disagree bluntly, challenge someone's comfort and watch their reaction. The insecure ones will withdraw or gossip. The strong ones will laugh, push back and stay. That's how the powerful filter their circle, not through flattery, but through friction. The real art lies in timing. A well-timed rude remark can reset dynamics in seconds. For instance, when a conversation starts spiraling into manipulation, someone's trying to guilt you, twist your words, or play the victim. You can cut through it with something brutally simple. You're not being honest. It's not cruel. It's clarity. Most people will panic when confronted with raw truth like that. They'll stumble, deflect, or get angry. But that's fine. You've already won because you've removed their mask. Machiavelli believed that masks are what hold the world together, but only the fearless know when to tear them off. And you should be fearless, because once you stop fearing the label of rude, you become untouchable. No one can emotionally blackmail you anymore. No one can force you to say sorry for being right. And that's when you start noticing something. People start treating you differently. They speak more carefully. They weigh their words. They stop assuming you'll tolerate nonsense. It's not that you've become mean. It's that you've stopped being manipulable. Rudeness, in that sense, is emotional armor. It's how the strong stay uncorrupted in a world that rewards flattery. Once you understand that, you begin to see how politeness has been weaponized against you your whole life. You were taught to be nice, but not to be respected, to keep peace, even when the peace only served your oppressor. The polite are punished for honesty, while the rude are feared for it. The irony is that the rude don't even need to be cruel. They just need to be indifferent to approval. That's the root of Machiavellian rudeness. Indifference. When you stop chasing approval, your tone naturally sharpens, your boundaries harden, and your energy stops leaking into pointless performances. Because the moment you need people to like you, you lose leverage. The moment you can walk away without explanation, you gain it. The people who can't understand this principle will always call you arrogant. But arrogance isn't the same as power. Arrogance needs an audience. True power doesn't. You don't need to prove that you're above anyone. You just need to stop pretending you're below them. That's why Machiavelli said, "The wise man must learn not how to be loved, but how to be feared in the right measure." Because fear doesn't always mean terror. Sometimes it simply means respect without intimacy. It means people sense that your boundaries aren't open for negotiation, and when rudeness is used in the right measure, it creates that precise balance, enough distance to protect your authority, yet enough presence to demand attention. Let's break down how that actually looks in daily life. When someone disrespects you, your instinct is often to explain, to argue, or to win them over. But Machiavelli would laugh at that. He'd say, "Explanation is a tax the powerless pay. The strong don't explain. They correct once sharply and move on." For example, when someone keeps interrupting you in a conversation, instead of saying, "Sorry, can I finish my point?" you look them in the eye and say, "I wasn't done speaking." That sentence might feel heavy, maybe even rude, but that's exactly the point. It shocks the balance back in your favor. People remember it. They recalibrate their tone the next time. Rudeness used like that becomes a psychological mirror. It reflects back the hidden disrespect others try to disguise. You stop letting things slide that chip away at your dignity. You stop using humor to cover up someone's insult. You stop making your sentences softer just to make others comfortable. Every time you do that, you reclaim a small piece of authority that polite society quietly stole from you. Because politeness at its core is a tool to manage others, not to liberate yourself. It's how groups keep individuals obedient by teaching them to equate bluntness with evil. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Those who define what's rude also define who's allowed to speak freely. But there's an even deeper layer to this. Rudeness, when mastered, isn't about being cold to others. It's about being fiercely loyal to your own truth. You become rude the moment you stop performing. When you tell someone exactly what you think without wrapping it in 10 layers of diplomacy, you reclaim honesty from fear. Most people avoid that because they know honesty threatens comfort. They'd rather be fake than be free. But Machiavelli's lens flips it. Comfort is the most dangerous illusion. The man who refuses to be uncomfortable with truth will always dominate the one who hides behind niceties. You see this dynamic in power structures everywhere. The CEO, who fires a manipulative employee without ceremony. The soldier who speaks harshly but saves lives because his orders are clear. The leader who doesn't flatter his people but earns their loyalty through results. All of them use what polite society would call rudeness, yet none of them are cruel. They're efficient, direct, unafraid of disapproval. They understand something most people never will. People follow certainty, not kindness. And sometimes rudeness is the language of certainty. But here's the catch. If you want your rudeness to be respected and not resented, it must come from stillness, not emotion. The rude person who's angry loses the same way the polite person who apologizes does. Both reveal dependency. Emotion gives away power because it shows your center is unstable. The trick is to be calm, even surgical. When you decide to be rude, do it with precision. Pause, look them in the eye, say what you need to say, then stop talking. Let the silence carry the message the words only hinted at. The silence afterward is what breaks people, not the sentence itself. Machiavelli would remind you that power is perception. The same word can seem rude or commanding depending on who says it. That's why preparation matters. Build credibility quietly, so when you finally use a sharp tone, it carries weight. If you're always reactive, no one takes your words seriously. But if you're normally composed and someone provokes you and you respond with a single brutal truth, the contrast hits harder than shouting ever could. People start realizing you're not the type to warn twice. There's another subtle advantage here. Selective rudeness filters parasites. The people who only liked you when you were endlessly polite will vanish. The ones who can handle your bluntness will stay. And the fewer people you have to tiptoe around, the more efficient your life becomes. You stop wasting emotional energy managing fragile egos. That's when your focus sharpens. Your presence grows colder and your reputation starts working for you. Even when you're silent, others will speak your name with a mix of admiration and caution. That's the Machiavellian sweet spot. When people fear disappointing you more than they fear confronting you. But don't confuse this with cruelty. Cruelty seeks to humiliate. Rudeness seeks to realign. One destroys respect, the other creates it. Machiavelli would say the cruel man must always watch his back, but the strategically rude man can walk freely because people know his motives aren't emotional, they're grounded in purpose. The rude man isn't trying to make you feel small. He's reminding you that not everything deserves a gentle tone. He's reminding you that truth has texture, that not every truth can be delivered wrapped in silk. Think of how you feel when someone cuts through your nonsense with brutal honesty. It stings, but if you're self-aware, you respect them for it. You might even seek their opinion again later. That's the paradox. The people who dare to be rude are often the most trusted because they're the only ones who don't lie for comfort. They say what everyone else is thinking, but too scared to say. That's why Machiavelli's lessons still cut through time itself. He told the truth about human nature without apology, and people still call him ruthless for it. But that ruthlessness is exactly what makes him timeless. Now imagine applying that same energy to your own life. You stop cushioning your opinions. You stop over-explaining. You stop giving soft answers to hard questions. Suddenly the world starts adjusting to you, not the other way around. The people who once talked over you start watching their tone. The ones who doubted you start quoting you, and all you did was stop performing politeness. Because the truth is, when you're done being polite, you're finally free to be respected. So how do you cultivate that kind of energy without crossing into chaos? You train yourself to delay your reactions. Before you respond, ask, am I being rude because I'm angry or because I'm drawing a line? If it's the latter, go ahead, deliver it cleanly. And if it's the former, pause. Wait until the fire cools. Because strategic rudeness isn't about dominance, It's about discipline. It's the art of using words like blades, not like bombs. You strike, then withdraw. No boasting, no justification, just precision. It's also important to recognize when not to use rudeness. Machiavelli believed that unpredictability is a weapon, but predictability is weakness. If you're rude every time someone irritates you, people will stop fearing it. It becomes expected. The secret is restraint. The quieter you are most of the time, the more power your words carry. When you finally speak sharply, like thunder after silence, it's the waiting that builds the power. So cultivate the silence. Let your restraint be your loudest statement. When people realize that your politeness is a choice, not a default, they'll treat you differently. You'll no longer need to prove yourself. Your respect will no longer depend on their approval, and that's when the shift happens, from reactive to sovereign, from polite to powerful, from heard to obeyed. Because in a world built on pretense, the one who dares to be authentically rude becomes the only one who's truly free. What makes strategic rudeness so magnetic is that it signals something deeper: certainty. People are starved for it. In a world where everyone hides behind politeness, the person who speaks directly radiates something rare: conviction. Even those who dislike you will remember you. They might resent your words, but they'll respect your spine. And in Machiavellian terms, that's far more valuable, because influence doesn't come from being agreeable, it comes from being undeniable. The first layer of this power is psychological. Rudeness, when delivered without apology, triggers an instinctive response in others. They become hyper-aware of your presence. Their brain flags you as unpredictable, and unpredictability commands attention. That's why the most dominant people in any room rarely raise their voices. They let discomfort do the work. Their silence becomes heavier than other people's words. Machiavelli would say, that kind of control is more powerful than any title or authority. Because once people start anticipating your reactions, you've already won. You've made them think twice before crossing you. There's an interesting social alchemy at play here. Politeness keeps people comfortable, and comfort breeds complacency. But rudeness disrupts that pattern. It introduces friction, which resets hierarchy. When used intentionally, that friction forces others to re-evaluate where they stand with you. It reminds them that respect isn't automatic. It must be maintained. And in doing so, it separates the bold from the opportunistic. Those who were only nice to you because you were safe suddenly back away when they sense you're capable of confrontation. But that's a good thing. Every person who walks away when you become firm was only loyal to your weakness. That's why the Machiavellian doesn't mind being misunderstood. He understands that clarity always offends the confused. Rudeness becomes a filter, a distillation of truth that polite people can't handle. You start realizing that the more honest you become, the smaller your circle gets, but also the stronger it becomes. Each remaining connection is built on authenticity, not obligation. That's the difference between having followers and having allies. The former like you when it's easy, the latter respect you even when it's uncomfortable. Let's take an example from social life. Think of someone who constantly makes jokes at your expense. Most people laugh along, maybe even add to it because they don't want to seem uptight. But that's how they lose control of perception. Machiavelli would advise something different. The next time it happens, you don't laugh. You look directly at the person and say, "You seem obsessed with trying to sound clever. It's not working." You don't raise your voice. You don't smile. You just leave it there. The silence that follows will do everything for you. Everyone around will understand what just happened, even the person who tried to embarrass you. That single sentence shifts social gravity in your favor because it breaks a pattern that everyone else was too afraid to touch. Strategic rudeness is also a defense against manipulation. Emotional manipulators rely on guilt. They count on you being too polite to call them out. They say things like, "I thought you cared," or "I guess I can't trust you," to drag you into their emotional web. But when you're Machiavellian about your rudeness, you see through it instantly. You can look at them and say, "You're trying to make me feel bad, so I'll do what you want." Most people would never dare to say that. But the few who do become immune to emotional control, because guilt only works on those seeking permission to be free. Once you give yourself that permission, you become untouchable. Machiavelli would call this offensive defense. Instead of waiting to be attacked, you strike preemptively with words, not emotion. You define the tone before others can. If you notice someone trying to box you into false politeness, you say something slightly too direct, too honest, just to break their rhythm. You don't need to act nice. Say what you actually mean. It might sound rude, but what it really does is reclaim control. You're setting the frame of the conversation. Once you do that, the other person either adapts to your honesty or reveals their insecurity, and both outcomes serve you. You start noticing how much of modern communication is a game of pretending. Everyone's scared of being disliked, so they coat everything in sugar until it loses all meaning. Rudeness becomes rebellion against that shallowness. It's not about being edgy, it's about being real in a world that punishes authenticity. When you master it, even your silences start to feel heavier. You stop needing to prove your intent. You speak when you choose, not when you're expected. And people start valuing your words precisely because they know you don't waste them. But here's where most people go wrong. They think being rude is the goal. It's not. The goal is to earn freedom from emotional restraint. Rudeness is just the knife you use to cut yourself loose. Once you've established that freedom, you don't need to use it often. The most Machiavellian people barely speak at all when others provoke them. They've transcended the need to prove superiority through words. Their presence alone feels sharp enough. When you reach that level, your calmness itself starts feeling like an act of dominance. You can see it in the eyes of those who used to challenge you. They stop meeting your gaze as easily because they feel it. You've become unshakable. At its core, Machiavellian rudeness isn't about disrespect. It's about refusing to dilute respect. It's a correctional force in a world addicted to softness. And sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and others is to stop pretending you're not angry, tired, or done. You can't inspire honesty in others if you're allergic to your own. So when you say something blunt, unfiltered, real, don't apologize afterward. Let it echo. Let it sting. The truth always offends before it liberates. When Machiavelli wrote about cruelty being well used, he wasn't glorifying pain. He was explaining restraint. He meant that cruelty, if necessary, should be swift, purposeful, and final. The same applies to rudeness. Use it once, effectively, and never return to the same battlefield. If you keep repeating your boundaries, they were never real. The first time you enforce them should be enough. If people still test you afterward, you don't need to argue. You just withdraw. Silence is your second strike, and it's deadlier than words. By the time someone realizes you've stopped engaging, they've already lost access to your attention, and that, in Machiavellian terms, is the ultimate punishment. Understand this. Being polite makes you approachable. Being selectively rude makes you powerful. The world respects tension more than harmony. Harmony feels safe, but it doesn't move people. Tension commands focus. Every empire, every movement, every leader Machiavelli studied had mastered tension. The ability to keep others slightly uncertain, slightly on edge, not hostile, just aware that your patience has a limit, is the psychology behind fear and fascination. They come from the same place, unpredictability. So when someone calls you rude, pause before reacting. Ask yourself, am I being rude or just refusing to be controlled? Because most people who call you rude are really saying, you stopped obeying me. That's the hidden meaning behind their discomfort. They don't actually want kindness, they want compliance. But you've grown past that. You've seen how much of your energy politeness has cost you, and now you're reclaiming it word by word, silence by silence. That's what Machiavelli's ruthless lesson really teaches. The point of rudeness isn't to dominate others, but to stop letting them dominate you. To speak when silence would make you complicit. To refuse softness when it becomes submission. To draw lines so clean that even those who hate you have no choice but to respect them. And when you live that way, something changes. Not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. You stop performing and start existing with precision, because the truth is, the world doesn't need more polite people. It needs more honest ones. Sometimes honesty wears the face of rudeness. Once you start embodying that kind of honesty, something strange happens. People begin to seek your approval, even if they claim to dislike you. That's because your presence gives them a reference point. Most people don't know what authenticity feels like anymore. They live in constant performance. When they meet someone who's unapologetically real, they feel both threatened and drawn in. They test you, challenge you, try to provoke you just to confirm whether your strength is genuine or an act. But if you remain unshaken, they'll quietly adjust to your energy. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, "Power must be demonstrated only once. After that, its memory sustains itself." Strategic rudeness is how you plant that memory. You don't have to repeat yourself. Your tone, your eyes, your stillness, they do it for you. When you've earned that kind of psychological presence, your words start carrying weight beyond logic. Even those who gossip about you in private will pause before saying your name too casually. You become someone whose reputation enters the room before you do. And that's not because you demanded respect. It's because you refuse to beg for it. Let's look at how this plays out in different environments. In personal relationships, people who fear being rude often become emotional hostages. They agree to things they don't want. They tolerate disrespect disguised as misunderstandings. They let manipulation pass just to avoid confrontation. And little by little, they lose all leverage. But when you start using rudeness as self-defense, everything shifts. You stop saying it's fine when it's not. You stop smiling at people who drain you. You stop explaining your boundaries to those who never respected them anyway. As a result, you start feeling lighter, calmer, and more focused. Being rude is not about aggression, it's about economy. You stop wasting emotional energy on diplomacy that only benefits others. In professional life, it's even more vital. The workplace rewards those who can appear confident without groveling. Think about the people who rise the fastest. They're rarely the ones who say yes to everyone. They're the ones who can say no without hesitation, the ones who interrupt when someone's wasting their time, the ones who speak fewer words but make every sentence land with clarity. It's not luck. It's social dominance disguised as simplicity. Machiavelli would say that a powerful person is not the one who knows everything, but the one who knows when to stop talking. That's the true elegance of authority, brevity that cuts. And the beautiful irony is that once you master strategic rudeness, you actually become more peaceful because you no longer suppress what you think. You no longer twist yourself into what others want you to be. You stop being reactive. Every time you use rudeness properly, it clears the air like lightning, brief, shocking, but purifying. You might lose a few people along the way, but what remains will be real. You'll find yourself surrounded by individuals who value clarity over comfort, strength over flattery. That's the foundation of real power. But let's talk about something deeper, the moral confusion people feel around this. They think, if I act like that, won't I become cold? Won't I push people away? And that's the trap. The world teaches you to equate warmth with virtue and sharpness with evil. But that's not how reality works. Machiavelli would say, morality without strength is decoration. Being good is meaningless if your goodness can be exploited. Strategic rudeness protects your goodness from being used against you. It's not the opposite of compassion, it's its bodyguard. Imagine compassion as gold. It's valuable, but soft. Without armor, it bends, melts, gets stolen. Rudeness is the steel casing that protects it. The person who can be both gentle and ruthless on command is unstoppable, because when they're kind, people feel it's genuine. They know this kindness isn't weakness, it's a choice. That's what gives it weight. Your words of affection mean more when people know you're also capable of silence, confrontation, or rejection. That duality is what Machiavelli called the balance of fear and love. Not one or the other, but both perfectly measured. Now, if you want to internalize this balance, you have to unlearn something first: the addiction to being misunderstood. Most people waste their lives trying to explain their intentions. They fear being labeled as rude, harsh, arrogant, or cold. But when you truly understand power, you realize that every label is a leash. The moment you start caring about what others call you, you start living by their permission. Strategic rudeness breaks that leash. It reminds you that misunderstanding is often the cost of integrity, and that's a small price to pay. Here's a truth most people never realize. When you stop defending your character, your reputation starts defending itself. Because time always exposes consistency. You don't need to explain that you're not actually rude. Your patterns will reveal it. You'll be the one who's fair but firm, calm but commanding. People might not like you at first, but eventually they'll trust you because they know exactly where you stand. And that kind of certainty is more valuable than popularity. This brings us to the emotional side of it. Rudeness doesn't mean you don't feel emotions. It means you don't let emotions dictate your expression. You can be furious and still speak with surgical precision. You can be disappointed and still sound calm. You can be done with someone and still be polite, but only once, as a courtesy, not as submission. Every emotion has its place, but you decide when and how it shows. That's the difference between the ordinary and the Machiavellian mind. The ordinary person reacts, the Machiavellian calculates. And sometimes calculation requires a sharp edge. Now, think of your own life. How many times have you swallowed the truth to protect someone else's feelings? How many times have you smiled through disrespect? How many times have you replayed a conversation in your head, wishing you'd said what you really meant? Those moments pile up, and eventually they start changing you. You become quieter, less confident, smaller. But when you begin speaking your mind, even if it sounds rude at first, that weight starts to lift. You start reclaiming your natural authority. You stop overthinking how your honesty will land and start focusing on whether it's necessary. That shift from emotional to essential is the birth of power. Because the reality is, most people don't deserve your politeness. Politeness should be a privilege, not a default. When you treat it that way, it becomes a reward, not a shield. You give it to those who have earned your respect, not to everyone who demands your attention. That's how you conserve energy and project quiet dominance without ever trying. You become like a fortress, open only by choice, not by pressure. And that's the real heart of Machiavellian rudeness. It's not about making others feel small, it's about making yourself untouchable. It's knowing when to close the gate, when to withdraw your warmth, when to let silence do the talking. It's about realizing that your presence itself is a limited resource and treating it that way. Because when people start realizing that not everyone has access to you, your value multiplies. That's how power compounds, not through constant visibility, but through controlled scarcity. The people who mistake that for arrogance were never meant to understand you. They live in a world where being agreeable is survival, but you've outgrown that world. You're not trying to survive anymore, you're trying to command. And sometimes command looks like walking away mid-conversation. Sometimes it sounds like saying no without explanation. Sometimes it feels like letting someone think you're rude when you're really just done explaining yourself. That's not rudeness, it's sovereignty.